window.
Well, the reason we got that report was because of the tenacious efforts of our first guest. He's a congressman from the great state of Arkansas. More importantly, he's the House Intelligence Committee chairman. He pressed President Trump and put in motion the actions that led to today's declassification and gave us this incredible jaw-dropping report. He is Congressman Rick Crawford. He joins us right now. Mr. Chairman, great to have you on the show, sir.
Morning, good afternoon.
Congratulations on getting this report to the American people. We know what Tulsi Gabbard thought of it. You've probably known about the findings of this report in a classified setting for a long time. Why is this more important than just a history lesson? There's something really important here, isn't there?
Yeah, this goes back 2017 when the initial investigation was launched by then Chairman Devin Nunes. We had access to it then and could go over and read it in the CIA space. But it was very, constrained kind of an environment where, it was difficult to read when people are looking over your shoulder. And, it's a difficult document to read anyway, because it's extensively sourced with footnotes and so on. So even though we had access to it, it was not easy to read under those conditions. So you mentioned that President Trump decided to help us out with that. It did take a whole lot of pressure. I'll be honest with you. I sent him a letter and we got the document within about 12 hours, literally. So he was very amenable to the request, as you can imagine. And then after review, as you said, D&I Gabbard had it, did the classification review, and it's now there for the whole world to see. What we found was that this is possibly one of the greatest perpetrations of fraud against the American people in history. What they did to President Trump, using false information, poorly sourced, in some cases not sourced intelligence reports. And so you can go through this, and people ask me, what are the highlights? I'll let you decide what the highlights are yourself, but here is the overriding concern that I have and have had for a number of years, and particularly as I had become chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and that is the lack of analytic integrity that continues to exist and persist throughout the intelligence community. And it stems from the CIA, but because the CIA is the preeminent agency within the IC writ large, it has percolated out over other agencies because they sort of set the tone. And this has, rather than becoming an anomaly type thing, it's become the norm. And so what we can't allow is for political bias to be introduced in the analytic process. And not only was political bias introduced in the analytic process, it was on steroids. What they did in this document, it's clear to see that this was about trying to demonize Trump. The fact is, there was never an association with Russia. What this document shows is that, if anything, they had a preference for a president, Hillary Clinton, because they had information on her that they could exploit after the fact. They were counting on a president, Hillary Clinton, and then they would have her over a barrel because of the information that they had on her. And if they had any interest in trying to propel Trump into the White House, they would have released that information and damaged her in advance of Election Day.
Stunning.
So Hillary Clinton obviously has her own problems stateside with the emails and the servers and the thumb drives and all of that. But what do you think Russia had on her? Because I don't think anything on that level would be something that Russia would find worth holding her over a barrel for.
Well, there's more information coming. What we have in this document basically shows that because of a DNC hack, they had information about her personally, her mental state, her health conditions, and so on. The use of tranquilizers daily, her mood swings, fits of rage, things of this nature. We saw that on display when she was at a campaign stop at Ground Zero late in the campaign, where she could barely move herself. She was being held up and helped into a van coming away from that particular event. So we saw the evidence of it. And that's one thing. There's obviously others that this document illuminates, but there's more to come on that front. But what we know about Hillary Clinton was that they actually preferred her because she was a softer target with regard to their ability to manipulate her based on the information that they had.
So stunning, sir. And the way this report is written, it's really understandable. I want to ask you if I understand the sequence correct. In September, the Intelligence Committee agrees that Russia doesn't have a preferred candidate. They're just causing mischief like they like to do and cause dissension and chaos. And on December 8th, they were going to go in after the election and tell the President Obama that was still their conclusion. President Obama or his team cancels that briefing and then switches and then tries to create an entirely different conclusion. Is that a layman's way of looking at the sequence?
That's a pretty good sequence of what took place. And then, of course, there was a brief, and then later on, the House Intelligence Committee was briefed. That's when it started to become apparent that there was something wrong. That's when Devin Nunes basically sniffed this out early on, and he initiated the investigation. Then, I think it was on January 6th of 2017, that's when things really started to accelerate with regard to what the deep state was engaged in. I say deep state because before I got on the Intelligence Committee, I was not inclined to entertain the notion of this deep state until I saw it for myself. And as having been on the Intelligence Committee now for 8 years, I can tell you that there are people who think that they run the government and they do it without any accountability and without any election. And they think that they're the ones that run the show. And that just can't happen because, ultimately we're the ones that are responsible. We represent, each of us represent, ostensibly 750,000 each of our constituents that are supposed to have a voice in this process and not be run by faceless, unelected bureaucrats. But that's exactly what was taking place. And it has accelerated over years. And, we've got to get some accountability. And I can't think of a better place to start than the IC.
Wow.
Sir, I know that there are a lot of Americans, at least 70 million or so, who would be very interested to hear the answers of these folks who you have subpoenaed. I know it's hot off the press, but have you gotten any indication if they are going to respond to the subpoena, if you're going to have to compel them further? Any idea about that?
Well, we haven't subpoenaed anybody in the Intelligence Committee yet. I don't know that we're going to do that. I know Oversight Government Reform, they have issued some subpoenas, and I would expect some probably from Judiciary, but I'm not the chairman. I'm not even on that committee, so I won't speculate. But I do know that Jim Jordan has a history of being pretty aggressive, so it's safe to say he will probably be subpoenaing some of those individuals himself. And that's where the work really gets done. I mean, there's a limit to what we can do in the House Intelligence Committee, and we've done an awful lot of work to shed light on this issue. And now we can, we've given the document for classification review. As you know, you've been able to read it now because of the work of D&I Gabbard. Now it's in the public realm. People can look at this. This can be adjudicated in the court of public opinion. But guess what? It's going to be adjudicated in federal court because we know that there's been criminal referrals on those individuals, that the high-profile individuals that we know of. There'll be some others, I feel like. And then the other thing is it's not necessarily always about trying to prosecute individuals. In some cases, it may not be possible to prosecute individuals, but we can hold them to account by ending their career as bureaucrats and deep state operatives in a federal agency. And that really is what the end state should be as it applies to some of these lower level employees that were just going along, that didn't have the intestinal fortitude to challenge leadership and say, no, I can't go along with that. That's unacceptable. At some point in time, you've got to have the moral clarity to say, no, I can't do that. It's in violation of ICD 203, Intelligence Community Directive 203, which governs analytic tradecraft. And if you're an analyst and you're in violation of that and you go along with it, then you are complicit. And if you're complicit, there will be accountability. And many of those folks, maybe GS 13s or even below at that time, have advanced up the rank, GS 15 or higher in senior executive service. They're now in positions of leadership, but they didn't have the integrity when it mattered to be able to push back against a corrupt leadership that was perpetrating maybe the biggest fraud against the American people in modern history.
That's so stunning. So we now have a great timetable. We know that the intelligence community believed that Hillary Clinton authorized the dirty trick on Donald Trump to hang a Russian shingle on his campaign house, even though it wasn't true. Barack Obama knows that in July. By September, we know that the FBI knew that Hillary Clinton was funding Christopher Steele's dossier, but they used it anyways for the FISA warrant, even though they knew she had authorized a dirty trick. By October, the CIA has warned the FBI that Christopher Steele's dossier is potentially infected with Russian disinformation because his network of sources was infected. We got that from a footnote, Declassified. In November, Christopher Steele's fired for violating his informant relationship with the FBI because he was leaking to the media. And then in December, after that entire history, John Brennan's CIA team thinks it's okay to use the dossier to predicate a part of this report, the most controversial part, that Russia wanted to help Donald Trump win the election. What does it say that the dossier could be used that way after all of those black marks were already apparent to all of the people who made that decision?
This was about driving a narrative that was predetermined. We are going to do everything we can to either lay the groundwork for impeachment, to impede the president's progress as a new president. That whatever their motivation was, it was clearly nefarious, and there were a lot of people involved. It goes all the way up to President Obama. He can't plead ignorance. He can't, play the plausible deniability card. He was intimately involved in this and authorized it. His henchmen, guys like Brennan and James Comey and Clapper, they were involved in this. If there were folks that brought it to their attention that, hey, look, this Steele dossier was a fabrication and discredited, they didn't care. They basically dismissed it and said, you know what? I think it rings true, so we're going to use it. And you can find that in this document that was just released today, those words. It rings true. He said it rings true. It's what we can sell to the American people. That's what we can do to damage President Trump. Now, would you tolerate this against any other president? Would anyone tolerate this kind of action against the President Obama, against the President Biden? No, they would be enraged at the thought that this went on. So take away the name Donald Trump and just put in president and see if you feel the same way.
You so powerfully made this available to the public, sir. You played a big role, just like Devin Nunes, in helping us unravel the falsehoods and finally get to the truth. It's a great honor to have you on, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for joining us today. All right, folks.